A Japanese crime lord is accused of trying to sell weapons-grade plutonium to America's enemies.
January 2025, Takeshi Ebisawa, a leader of the Japanese Yakuza crime syndicate, pled guilty in a New York federal court to conspiring to traffic nuclear materials, including weapons-grade plutonium from Myanmar, as well as to narcotics and weapons charges. Here, sometimes gangs messed with the wrong countries. We go to July 2019. The streets of northern Italy were flooded with flashing blue lights as heavily armed police officers stormed dozens of hideouts. This was a massive operation to take down the dreaded Nigerian gang known as the Black Axe Confraternity. The Black Axe didn't start as just another street gang. This was one of the most ruthless criminal gangs in the world. Originating out of Nigeria in the 70s as a university fraternity, it quickly transformed into this violent mafia-like organization, and by the 2000s, their influence extended far beyond Nigeria's borders, reaching European cities, particularly in Italy. The gang specifically was into drug trafficking, slavery, and very violent crimes. So, taking advantage of Italy's large Nigerian immigrant population, the Black Axe would establish itself in major cities like Sicily, Turin, Palermo, and Bologna. They ran a parallel underworld within the country, dealing in cocaine, heroin, and synthetic drugs. More chillingly, they controlled a vast human trafficking network, smuggling women in from Nigeria under false promises of jobs, only to force them into prostitution under brutal conditions. Those who try to escape faced beatings, and even death. Their violence was legendary. Unlike Italy's traditional mafia groups, which often operated behind closed doors, the Black Axe made their brutality public. In the slums of Castel Valturno, where many Nigerian migrants settle, the gang carries out public executions, sets their enemies on fire, and would torture those who failed to pay their debts. It was this reckless violence that would ultimately lead to their downfall. Now, the group's influence is not confined to Italy. In Ireland, investigations by the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau under Operation Skene identified 1,100 individuals linked to the Black Axe. These people were connected to laundering over 84 million euros through Irish banks. Gang's operations in Ireland have persisted for a decade, involving severe crimes like murder and human trafficking. Their fraudulent schemes often involve cloning emails from legitimate companies to divert payments into accounts they control, subsequently moving the funds internationally. Among those apprehended was Funmi Ambimbala, a former bank employee sentenced to 3 years for helping gangs launder money through multiple bank accounts. The Black Axe has also settled in Germany, engaging in human trafficking, internet fraud, and drug smuggling. An interview with a member revealed the group's strict hierarchical structure and the severe consequences faced by those attempting to leave. Their presence in Germany, more specifically in places like Bavaria, has really led to serious concerns amongst law enforcement agencies. The group's expansion into France has also been noted, with Nigerian criminal organizations, including the Black Axe, spreading their influence, operating through discrete pyramid-like structures with brutal initiation rituals. They engaged in things from drug trafficking to prostitution and online scams. Now, in France, these gangs have escalated from working under established networks to running drug outlets independently. Paris judiciary views their involvement as primarily importing and exporting merchandise rather than retail sales. They do fear potential growth in drug trafficking. May 2018, Italian authorities had seen enough. The Black Axe had not only become a direct threat to Italian society, but it also started challenging local mafia groups in key areas. That's a dangerous move. While Italy's powerful crime syndicates like the 'Ndrangheta and Cosa Nostra allow foreign gangs to operate under certain rules, the Black Axe went too far, making enemies out of both the law and the mafia. Killing, along with the rising number of missing young African women, triggered Italy's biggest anti-mafia investigation in years. Law enforcement agencies, including the Italian Carabinieri and the anti-mafia prosecutors, launch a full-scale surveillance operation. We had wiretaps, undercover officers, international intelligence sharing, all put into play to dismantle the gang. July July 2019, in a series of well-coordinated raids, Italian police struck multiple cities at once. More than 30 gang members were arrested in Turin, Milan, and Palermo, including several high-ranking leaders of the Black Axe. The dramatic scenes play out like your favorite Hollywood movie: battering rams, smashing doors, choppers hovering above crime hubs, and gangsters dragged out in handcuffs. In this specific intense raid in Bologna, police had stormed a Black Axe safe house, only to find a hidden torture chamber where victims had been chained, beaten, and left to rot. About 26 women were found dead. Authorities also uncovered secret tunnels used to smuggle drugs and people, some leading directly to mafia-controlled neighborhoods. The evidence collected was damning: money laundering schemes, fake documents, and communication logs linking them back to Nigeria. The operation was a turning point. The arrest paralyzed the gang's activities, cutting off their operations. We had several high-ranking members facing long prison sentences, while Italy moved swiftly to deport many of the arrested gangsters right back to Nigeria. Now, more importantly, the Black Axe's defeat sent a clear message that Italy would no longer tolerate foreign criminal networks terrorizing its cities. It's already okay with its local ones. The crackdown did also have a ripple effect, leading to other European countries knocking them out, like Spain and Germany, where the gang had strong operations. Even back in Nigeria, authorities felt pressure to act against the Black Axe, leading to further crackdowns back home. December 12, 2021, BBC Africa Eye releases a powerful documentary called Black Axe: Nigeria's Mafia Cult. The film exposed the secret world of the Black Axe. It showed how the gang was involved in murders, fraud, and organized crime, not just in Nigeria, but across the world. Many people had already suspected the group's activities. This documentary provides clear evidence of their crimes. For years, Black Axe tried to hide under a legal organization called the Neo-Black Movement, NBM. They claimed to be a charity and a cultural group. BBC investigation revealed shocking secrets, including brutal killings, secret oaths, and online scams that stole money from victims around the world. The documentary was a huge embarrassment to the group, just ruining their public image and making it difficult to operate in the shadows. After the documentary aired, NBM denied everything. They said they had nothing to do with Black Axe's crimes and called the BBC report false and unfair. The group was so angry that they gave the BBC 7 days to take back that documentary. They even threatened to sue for $2.4 million. Despite these threats, the BBC stood by its report. They refused to take down any documentary because all the evidence was too real and carefully investigated. March 27, 2022, El Salvador woke up to horror. In just one weekend, the ruthless gang known as MS-13 had slaughtered 87 innocent people across the country. Their goal was to remind the government who was in charge, but they had no idea they had just signed their own death warrant. By the time the sun set that day, President Nayib Bukele declared a state of emergency. What followed was one of the most dramatic crackdowns that would make even Trump cream his pants. In just months, El Salvador transformed from one of the most dangerous places on earth to a country where gangs no longer ruled the streets. Now, to understand why El Salvador fought so aggressively, you really got to understand who MS-13 is. Born in the 1980s out of Los Angeles, MS-13, better yet known as Mara Salvatrucha, was created by Salvadoran immigrants who had fled the Civil War. And we won't get into who caused the Civil War, that's another story. When the US deported thousands of gang members back to El Salvador, gang found a new home and quickly took over. For decades, MS-13 terrorized their country. They extorted, ran drug operations, and controlled entire neighborhoods. If you didn't pay their rent, they'd kill you. If you cross into their territory, you disappear. If you even dare spoke out against them, your whole family could be wiped out. The police and government were either too scared to fight back or were on the payroll. The gang's ruthless, known for hacking enemies to death with machetes, beheading their victims, and leaving their bodies in public places to send their message. Their motto was Mata, Viola, Controla, meaning kill, rape, control. So by 2015, El Salvador had the highest murder rate in the world, and MS-13 was the main reason why. They'd become really arrogant though. They believed that they were untouchable, even when previous governments tried to crack them down. Gang leaders negotiated with politicians behind the scenes. Deals were made, truces broken. The violence never stopped. Then came March 2022. After years of political maneuvering, MS-13 decides they didn't need to negotiate anymore. Just 3 days, they unleash a wave of violence that shocked the most hardened Salvadorans. Women, children, old men. No one was spared. Bodies lay in the streets. Government had no choice but to act. In steps President Nayib Bukele, already known for his tough stance on crime, and unleashes the full power of the state. The state of emergency gave authorities unprecedented power. Police no longer needed arrest warrants. Suspected gang members could be detained indefinitely. Communications were monitored. Country was placed on a military-style lockdown. But Bukele wasn't just going after foot soldiers. He wanted to wipe MS-13 off the map. Thousands of soldiers flood the streets. From the big cities to suburbs and little towns, it's swept clean. Government builds mega prisons to house the flood of arrested gang members. Entire neighborhoods that were once MS-13 strongholds are now surrounded by the military. No one went in, no one came out. Within a year, over 75,000 suspected gang members were arrested. The numbers were staggering. 1 out of every 100 Salvadorans was in prison. Even top leaders, once protected by secrecy, were hunted down. Many tried to flee, some caught at the borders, others hiding in the jungle. But there's no escape. The images coming out of El Salvador shocked the world. Thousands of heavily tattooed MS-13 members, now bald and shackled, crammed into high-security prisons. What? Bukele made sure no one would forget. He released these videos of gangsters marching in their underwear, shackled together like prisoners of war. And the world watched as the once unstoppable MS-13 was humiliated, caged, and completely powerless. Welcome to hell. No visitors, no phone calls, no sunlight. Food is rationed to the bare minimum. Guards control every second of your existence. These gangs are now in a place where the country no longer tolerates their crap. Check out the numbers. El Salvador's murder rate plummeted by over 98%. That's the first time in decades Salvadorans could walk the streets without fear. Just imagine letting your child be able to go out and play again. You had businesses flourishing now without paying some extortion fee. The impossible had happened. MS-13 had lost. Of course, not everyone agreed with Bukele's methods. Human rights would accuse his government of mass arrests without trials, reports of torture in prisons, and imprisoning innocent people. Families of suspected gang members claim their sons and husbands were taken without evidence, which is pretty messed up. Well, Bukele comes out and says he doesn't care. He stated that the country had suffered for far too long. The old way, negotiating with criminals, had failed. What he had done was something no other leader dared to do, and Salvadorans agreed. Bukele's approval rating soared above 90%. These people were exhausted from decades of violence and now were willing to trade some freedoms for security. Now, while El Salvador's crackdown crushed the gang at home, MS-13 still exists in other countries. You can find them in the US, Honduras, and Guatemala as their cells continue to operate. Now, some leaders escaped before the purge, waiting for a chance maybe to rise again. But in El Salvador, the war was on.
Members of the notorious Tren de Aragua gang are increasingly drawn to sanctuary cities.
January 2025, the U.S. federal government launches the most aggressive anti-gang operation in history. It's not just another crackdown, people. It's a declaration of war. The target was Tren de Aragua, a ruthless Venezuelan gang that had been spreading its criminal empire across the Americas like wildfire. The U.S. had had enough. Gang had crossed too many lines, and now the full force of American law enforcement was coming for. Now, this is no ordinary gang. Tren de Aragua had built its reputation on extreme violence, extortion, human trafficking, and drug smuggling. They weren't just making money over here. It was about power, and they'd been growing bolder with each passing month. However, their expansion into the U.S. was ultimately stupid. August 2024, a surveillance video comes out of this apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado, showing armed individuals attempting to forcibly enter a unit. That unsettling footage quickly went viral, igniting widespread concern and debate across the nation. The individuals alleged for this were members of Tren de Aragua. Now, the video's release had immediate and profound implications. Local authorities launched investigations trying to verify the gang affiliations of the suspects, which brings us to March 2025. President Trump invokes the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a seldom used statute, and this is to expedite the deportation of individuals identified as members of Tren de Aragua. This move marked a significant escalation in immigration enforcement, really reflecting the administration's commitment to addressing perceived threats from foreign criminal organizations. The invocation of such a historic law underscores the gravity with which this administration views that situation, signaling a zero-tolerance approach to gang-related activities. You see, Tren de Aragua wasn't just a gang. This was an empire of terror. Born inside the walls of Venezuela's Tocorón prison, it started as a loose network of criminals controlling the prison's daily operations. But give it some time, and they spread beyond the walls. cartels, infecting cities, and smuggled drugs along with human trafficking. And by the time they reached U.S. soil, they'd already infiltrated Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Brazil. And unlike other cartels that moved their drugs in the shadows, Tren de Aragua didn't really hide it. They expanded through sheer brute force. These people extorted immigrants, took over prostitution rings, and even ran fentanyl operations that caused thousands of American overdoses. If someone refused to pay that extortion fee, they wouldn't just kill them, make an example out of them. Bodies, burnt victims, and public executions became their signature, so it wasn't long before the gang started clashing with U.S. law enforcement. Fresh into his term, President Trump slaps the foreign terrorist organization label on Tren de Aragua during a rally that had the crowd roaring. By calling them terrorists, he opens the door to wartime powers like the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to round up and ship out anybody linked to a gang. No immigration court required. Kelly be proud. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's been beating the drum too, painting these guys as the poster children for why the border's a mess. So what happens to these guys once ICE grabs them? Well, first stop is Guantanamo Bay.
Yesterday, the first group of people deported from the U.S. arrived at Guantanamo Bay.
In late January, the administration turned that old war on terror outpost into a holding pen for high-threat illegal aliens. By February, military cargo jets are hauling about 180 Venezuelans with alleged Tren de Aragua members amongst them down to Cuba. However, they weren't there for too long. Reports say the place hit nearly 200 detainees before they started clearing it out by mid-March, either deporting them back to Venezuela or shuffling them back stateside. You can imagine the conditions are really tough, and of course rumors of mistreatment and obviously no lawyers. Then there's the El Salvador twist. The U.S. cuts a deal with Nayib Bukele's government amounting to a contract of $6 million to lock up around 300 supposed Tren de Aragua members in those mega prisons El Salvador's now famous for. Over in Aurora, Colorado, ICE rolls up on what they think is a Tren de Aragua stronghold. About 30 arrests are made, and as they move forward, it looks like Tren de Aragua is being totally dismantled in the U.S.
Quiere pro Slovensku? Ela doza będzie.
We go back to April 2014. Operation Escalade set in motion, a police mission unlike any Scotland had seen before. This operation was a declaration of war against Scotland's criminal underworld, who thought that they were untouchable, the Gillespie Crime Syndicate. Now, for years, the gang operated with reckless abandon, flooding Scotland with drugs, intimidating communities, and engaging in extreme violence. Their reach would extend far beyond Scottish borders, with direct links to South American narco-terrorists, who supply them with an endless stream of cocaine. But what makes them truly dangerous was their arrogance. Now, they believed that they could run their empire without any consequence, bribing officials, threatening their enemies, and silencing anyone who dares stand in their way. They had no idea that Scotland was about to fight back, though, with an operation so massive that it would shake the very foundations of their criminal empire. The center of this syndicate were James and Barry Gillespie, two brothers who built their empire on fear and brutality. These guys controlled drug trafficking, extortion, and money laundering across Scotland, with operations in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Aberdeen. Their influence would stretch into Europe, Australia, and even South America, where they would secure shipments of pure cocaine straight from cartels. The gang was kind of untouchable, at least that's what they thought. Their members were known for some public executions, kidnappings, and even torture to maintain control. Scotland did their best to control organized crime, but the Gillespies always managed to stay one step ahead. They used their burner phones, encrypted messaging apps, and a network of corrupt insiders to dodge police surveillance. But they underestimated the relentless force of Scotland's police. Enter Operation Escalade. Not just another routine police crackdown. We have a meticulously planned, decade-long mission to take down the gang piece by piece. The strategy was to infiltrate, gather evidence, and strike hard. Scotland police would work with Interpol, the FBI, and even South American law enforcement to trace drug shipments, follow the money, and maybe map the gang's hierarchy. We had wiretaps, undercover agents, and surveillance operations providing crucial intel. And slowly but surely, they would build a case that would bring this empire down. Now, the first major breakthrough came in 2016, when police intercepted a 10 million pound cocaine shipment from Belgium destined for Scotland. It was a fatal blow, the first crack in the gang's foundation actually, but the Gillespies wouldn't back down. Instead, they go on a rampage rampage, launching attacks on suspected informants, burning down properties, and even putting bounties on police officers. This was no longer just about drugs. It was war, and Scotland was ready to fight it. 2018, the pressure was mounting. Gangs' trusted enforcers were either dead, in hiding, or flipping for reduced sentences. One by one, dominoes fell. 2019, a major police raid across Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Dundee led to the arrest of 25 gang members, including top lieutenants. 2020, police seized £30 million worth of drugs, weapons, and cash, delivering a crushing financial blow. Then the gang's overseas operations collapsed as Interpol shut down their South American connections, cutting off their main supply of cocaine. As for the Gillespie brothers, they vanished, becoming fugitives on the run, hiding out in Dubai and even Brazil. But even the world's biggest cities aren't going to be big enough to keep them safe. 2023, the police announced that it's possible the Gillespie brothers had been killed in Brazil and are probably in a shallow grave somewhere in the jungle. April 17, 2007, Icho Ito, the mayor of Nagasaki, collapsed in a pool of blood outside his campaign office. The assassin was a Yamaguchi-gumi gangster named Tetsuya Shiro, and this single assassination was going to lead to the downfall of the Yamaguchi-gumi gang. Assassinating a public official is an attack on democracy itself, and this time the government had had enough. What followed would be a relentless crackdown that would shake the entire Yakuza empire to its core. The Yakuza weren't just any ordinary gang. If you don't know them, they're a shadow government operating openly in Japan for centuries. Unlike other syndicates that hide in the dark, the Yakuza have offices, business cards, even fan clubs. You can find their influence deep into politics, construction, finance, and entertainment. But with all this power came recklessness, and by the 1980s, Yakuza factions had turned Japan's streets into war zones. You had gunfights, assassinations, and firebombings becoming routine, especially amongst rival groups like the Yamaguchi-gumi, Sumiyoshi Kai, and Inagawa Kai. We didn't just have turf wars, people. The Yakuza's greed knew no bounds. They ran protection rackets, human trafficking rings, drug smuggling operations, and billion-dollar fraud schemes. They even infiltrated the Tokyo Stock Exchange, manipulating the economy. For decades, police turned a blind eye. The Yakuza were seen as a necessary evil, enforcing their own brutal version of justice while keeping petty criminals in check. But as their crimes escalated, their luck ran out. By the early 90s, Japan's patience was wearing thin. The final straw was a series of brutal gang wars that spilled into civilian areas, leading to innocent deaths. March 1992, government passed the Anti-Boryokudan law, officially labeling the Yakuza as violent criminal organizations. That was a game changer. For the first time, police had the legal power to monitor, restrict, and dismantle Yakuza operations. Membership itself wasn't illegal, but engaging in Yakuza activities was. Government froze their assets, banned businesses from working with them, and made it illegal to even rent them apartments. But the Yakuza didn't back down. When Tetsuya Shiro gunned down Nagasaki's mayor, he thought he could escape with a light sentence. After all, the Yakuza had connections in the police and legal system, right? This time, Japan refused to let him off the hook. This outraged the entire nation. The government responded with unprecedented force. Hundreds of gang members were arrested, and businesses that had secretly worked with the Yakuza were exposed and blacklisted. 2011, Kudokai, one of the most violent Yakuza factions, went too far. Fukuoka attacks. They shot a retired police officer, stabbed a nurse, and even threw acid on a dentist who refused to cooperate with them.
Police in Japan have arrested the suspected head of the Kudokai, one of the most violent Yakuza organized crime rings.
The government responds with Japan's strictest anti-Yakuza laws yet. Banks are forced to freeze Yakuza accounts, and anyone caught doing business with them faced jail time. Even restaurants that would serve food to Yakuza bosses risked being shut down, as the syndicate had now lost their grip on power. 2015, the unthinkable happened when the mighty Yamaguchi-gumi, Japan's biggest gang, split in two due to the pressure from the government. The once united criminal empire descended into chaos as rival factions turned on each other, leading to bloody street battles and revenge killings. So the government takes full advantage of that and launches mass arrests and dismantles their networks. Meanwhile, public support for the Yakuza had vanished. Ordinary people who once feared and respected them now saw them as thugs and terrorists. Even former Yakuza bosses admitted defeat. Some retired while others were forced into hiding. At their peak in the 90s, they had over 90,000 members. Now, less than 24,000 are left, and the gang is shrinking fast. Maybe the most interesting case of Yakuza bosses messing with countries was the case of Takeshi Ebisawa. April 2022, Takeshi Ebisawa, a 60-year-old leader of a Yakuza crime syndicate, was arrested in Manhattan, New York. He faced charges of conspiring to traffic nuclear materials, which included uranium and weapons-grade plutonium sourced out of Myanmar. His illicit activities also encompassed international narcotics trafficking and weapons offenses.
A Japanese crime lord is accused of trying to sell weapons-grade plutonium to America's enemies.
DEA had been investigating Ebisawa since at least 2019. You see, during that period, he engaged with an undercover DEA agent posing as a narcotics and weapons trafficker. Through that connection, Ebisawa introduced the agent to his extensive network of criminal associates spanning in Japan, Thailand, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and the United States. Conspired to broker the purchase of US-made surface-to-air missiles and other heavy weaponry intended for ethnic armed groups in Myanmar. As partial payment for those weapons, he planned to distribute large quantities of heroin and methamphetamine into the US, specifically targeting the New York market. In early 2020, Ebisawa told undercover agents about his substantial quantities of nuclear materials, which included uranium and weapons-grade plutonium, that he intended to sell. He would show him pictures depicting substances with Geiger counters measuring radiation and lab analysis, indicating the presence of thorium and uranium. These markets were sourced from Myanmar, the expectation that they would be used in the development of nuclear weapons. January 8th, 2025, Ebisawa pled guilty in a Manhattan federal court to charges of conspiring to sell nuclear materials from Myanmar, as well as being involved in drug trafficking and weapons-related crimes. The charges carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in prison and the possibility of life imprisonment.